todos. Voy a interpretar consecutivamente todo lo que nos acaban de compartir. I will first consecutively interpret that introduction. Gracias por estar aquí con nosotros hoy. Tenemos gente en el espacio en vivo, pero también tenemos gente en línea por Zoom. Estamos aquí para la reunión del repaso del borrador del Código de la Ciudad. Primero, unas cosas para aclarar del espacio. Esta reunión sí está siendo grabada y va a estar subida en la página web de Engage Kingston. Entonces ahí la puede encontrar y también se lo puede pasar a otras personas que no están aquí con nosotros hoy. También en el espacio de Zoom pueden ver el botón que dice chat. Si tiene algún problema con la tecnología, por favor déjenos saber a través del chat en Zoom y le podemos ayudar. De nuevo, la página web donde estamos publicando información del proyecto es engagekingston.com, E-N-G-A-G-E, kingston.com, y aquí lo puede compartir con otras personas que no están aquí hoy. Y ahora voy a dejar que los intérpretes den su introducción. So, hi everybody, my name is Adriana, and together with my compa Verónica, we will be supporting this meeting with simultaneous interpretation English-Spanish. Hola a todos, mi nombre es Adriana y aquí con mi compa Verónica vamos a estar apoyando esta reunión con interpretación simultánea español-inglés. Los organizadores de este evento se han comprometido a la justicia del lenguaje y esta reunión entonces va a ser interpretada. The organizers of the event have committed to language justice, so this event will be interpreted and accessible in Spanish. La función de interpretación ya está activada. The interpretation function has already been activated. Para acceder a esta función desde su computadora, puede buscar el globo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla y ahí darle clic, elegir interpretación de idiomas y luego seleccionar su canal de idiomas preferido. To access this function from your computer, you can find the globe at the bottom of your screen, click it, choose language interpretation, and then select your preferred language channel. Para acceder a la función desde un teléfono o una tableta, puede buscar los 3 puntos en la parte de abajo de la pantalla, tocar más, luego interpretación de idiomas, y luego puede seleccionar su canal de idiomas y tocar finalizar. Este último paso de finalizar es lo que activa la función. If you're accessing this function from a phone or a tablet, please find the 3 dots at the bottom of the screen, select more, then language interpretation, and then you can select your language channel and click done. This last step of clicking done is what activates the function. Si tiene alguna dificultad accediendo la interpretación, por favor déjenos saber a través del chat. If you have any difficulties accessing this function, please let us know through the chat. Por último, crear espacios multilingües es un esfuerzo colectivo y ahora les vamos a contar una de las maneras a los presentadores de cómo podemos apoyar el compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje. So lastly, creating a multilingual space is a collective effort. And so we're going to share some of the ways that the presenters here today can support this commitment to language justice. Por favor, le pedimos a las personas presentando hoy que hablen despacio, que respiren, especialmente si están leyendo de una diapositiva o de un papel. Y si necesitamos que hablen un poco más lento, nos van a ver haciendo esta señal o diciendo algo en el chat. So for the presenters today, one of the ways you can support us is speaking not too fast, taking breaths, especially if you're reading from a paper or from a slide. And if you're going too fast, you might see us interpreters going like this on the screen, or we might tell you through the chat. Por favor, hablen duro, tengan buen sonido, y todo el mundo que no esté hablando, manténganse en mudo. Please, we ask the presenters to speak loudly and clearly close to the mic, and we ask everyone else who's not sharing to please mute their microphones. Le pedimos por favor que solamente haya una persona hablando a la vez para así no tener que escoger la persona que interpretamos. We ask please that only one person speak at a time, and that way we don't have to choose who to interpret. Y les pedimos por favor a los presentadores que si comparten un acrónimo, que primero lo definan, por lo menos la primera vez, para que todo el mundo pueda entender de qué estamos hablando. And we ask the presenters here today to please, at least the first time you mention an acronym, please define it. And that way everyone can know what exactly you are talking about. Por último, las personas que nos están callando en español van a oír que usamos terminaciones en E a veces. Esto no es un error de pronunciación, sino que es una decisión deliberada para poder construir inclusividad de género. Finally, the people listen to us in Spanish, you might hear that we end some words in E, and this is not an error in our pronunciation. It's just a deliberate decision so that we can build gender inclusivity in how we speak in Spanish. Gracias por su compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje y que tengan muy buena reunión. Thank you for your commitment to language justice, and have a great meeting.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, our agenda for tonight. We're going to start with a brief welcome from the mayor, and then we will get into an overview of the process so far, and then the overview of the first draft of the form-based code. So our goal tonight, again, is to give a really great overview of the code and then talk about next steps. There are a lot of opportunities this week and over the next coming month for interaction and discussion, and looking forward to that. So, but with that, I'm going to turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you all for being here both in person and virtually with us this evening. As we have been following, I hope you have been following this process that really started last fall with so much great community input and engagement, and has led to what I believe is a really great first draft of what will help guide our city for literally generations to come. The decisions that we make collectively that go onto paper in this document will be what helps make our city beautiful, inclusive, affordable, walkable, and economically viable. And so these are some really important decisions. And the more input we get, the better we make this product, and the more precise we are reflecting the values of our community. And so for me, this opportunity is for us, I think, once in a lifetime. It hasn't been changed substantially in a very long period of time. And so this is, I think, a critical point for Kingston to be able to take the efforts and the really great work that Dover Cole has done and the great work the community has done, and under the leadership of our Director of Housing Initiatives, Bartek Starodaj, we are going to I believe we're going to be able to give the Common Council a really great form-based code that's going to make our city work well, and so that we all can live here and be able to have a community that we can be really proud of as we look to what the next generation of Kingstonians will have once we leave this place. And so with that, I want to thank you all for coming, both in person and virtually, and please take an opportunity, if you can, to participate in our open houses this week, and make sure you send us your comments, because we really want to be able to make sure we get this right. So thank you, Amy.
Okay, I am here tonight as a representative of a larger team of consultants. You can see the names and some of the images there on the screen. So we have experts in land use planning and land use law, transportation planning, and online code platforms. And so we have with us tonight by Zoom, Victor Dover and Elise Dallas from Dover Cole. You'll hear from them, as well as Max Zabala from Gridix. So where we are in the process, we began last fall with some visioning meetings and surveys and some additional input meetings that we held last February. We had published the first draft of the code just last month in May, and we're asking for feedback on it by July 1st. So basically we have this month to review and gather feedback. The purpose for tonight, I mentioned, is to give a pretty comprehensive overview of what's in the code. And then there'll be lots of opportunities for discussion and feedback. And just putting on the screen here a recap of some of those meetings. This weekend on Friday and Saturday, we have open house events on Friday, right here in this room at 2 o'clock, council chambers, Friday night for wards 4, 5, and 6 from 5:30 to 7:30 over at the library. On Saturday morning, we are going to be holding a walking tour of the waterfront area. This is rescheduled from, some of you might remember our February event we had planned and was snowed out. So we'll be doing it on Saturday morning. And then on Saturday, 2 more events, one at 10:30 over at the Old Dutch Church for wards 1, 2, and 3. And then one in the afternoon at Rondout Neighborhood Center for the wards 7, 8, and 9. And then finally, later on this month, we're going to have a public hearing by Zoom at 6:30 on June 22nd. So there'll be another opportunity to give us feedback once you've had time to review all the details of the code. So you might hear us mention the charrette tonight. For those who weren't able to join us, the charrette was held last November. It was a series of online and in-person input events, walking tours, interactive input sessions, where we worked to gather feedback about what was important to the Kingston community. Our team worked here in this room on site for a week, drawing and testing ideas for sample sites. The goal was to document the community's vision for future development and improvements in the city. And all of that is documented in a short summary report that you can see at engagekingston.com. So if you were not able to join us, you can do a quick scan over that to get up to speed. I mentioned we also had some input meetings in February. So these were focused specifically on the Rondout waterfront, Albany Avenue, and Hurley Avenue, where we had some additional questions about the vision for those areas. And again, that input is summarized at the engagekingston.com website. So we're going to pause real quick now. If anyone has their phone with them to take it out, we're going to use our cell phones to be able to kind of get a sense of who's joining us, both online and in person. And so we have a couple of questions now, and then we will use this again towards the end of the event once we've gone through the meeting. So this is how it works. We're going to be, if you open up your text messaging and you send a text to the number 22333, and you send in the message Dover Cole 516. I'll say this a few times while everyone gets it out and gets it ready. You send a text to 22333, and you send the message Dover Cole, DOVERKOHL 516. And if you do that successfully, you'll get a message that looks like this, that says you've joined Dover Cole's meeting. And then now, once you've joined, you don't have to do anything else, and you'll be able to answer. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to ask Elise to bring up the questions on her end, and we'll run through those.
Okay. Okay, so like Amy said, once you get that text message, you should be all set. And here's our first question. What is your primary interest? A, I live in the city of Kingston. So if that's your answer choice, you just text A. Or B, I work in the city of Kingston. C, I own property in the city of Kingston. D, I don't live, work, or own property in the city of Kingston, but I frequently visit. Or E, none of the above. So once again, you just send the letter that corresponds with your answer choice. And we'll give everyone a couple minutes just to get their answers in. Okay, awesome. So it looks like everyone's got their answers in. So we just have one more question until we continue with the presentation. And we'll do more keypad polling later in the presentation. Okay, so this one is, have you been to any previous Kingston Forward meetings? So these can include the charrette events that occurred, the meetings in February that occurred. So A is yes and B is no. Okay, awesome. It looks like everyone's just about got their answers in, but we'll leave it for a few more seconds and then continue with the presentation.
Thank you. And it's good to see a lot of folks joining us again, but also a good number of folks who coming to their first meeting. So it's great to know. And if you want to the meet on the TV, I think we'll, as Elise mentioned, we have some additional questions that we will ask shortly. So let me just go ahead and get to, sorry about that. Okay, so from all of those meetings, we had a number of what we call big ideas that have emerged. And I'm going to actually turn it over to Victor, and he is going to talk through these big ideas that we took from those initial meetings.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you, Elise. And Mayor, thank you for the introduction. I agree with you. This is a really big thing, historic moment in the life of any community, because the land development regulations are like the genetic code from which all towns grow. And if you get the code right, you can grow healthy communities. So we're just very honored to be here and be part of this with you. We know that a first draft is not going to be identical to the one that finally gets adopted. So it will get improved through this process. As Amy was describing from all the meetings and community input, we've written up a series of big ideas. And these ideas form the kind of backbone or blueprint goals for the draft code. You'll notice these little icons that we have over to the left side of the screen. You'll see some of these icons throughout tonight's presentation, but just to give you a hint of where the draft code provisions are picking up on and implementing one of these key ideas. First, there's at the top of the list, there's a desire to make smaller incremental development that fits the community vision, easy to do and encouraged by improving and simplifying the approvals process. We all think of Kingston, historic Kingston, as a place that was built through a great many small developments rather than a small number of large developments. And so encouraging smaller incremental development is that first goal at the top of the list. Next, there's a desire to have new development fit its context, fit the context of the surrounding neighborhood with a consistent building to street relationship, we call it. And especially to encourage walkability. And so that's on our list. Next, there's a need for a wide variety of housing types. Part of this is about improving affordability and variety to match your varied households. Not everybody's the same, not everybody has the same amount of money, but you need a wide variety of housing to fit it. So this includes accessory dwelling units. And we'll get into some of the details about that shortly. Next, there at the bottom of this first page of the list, there's an imperative really to have new development support the community vision for sustainability and resilience. So that's built in here. Now, I'm giving you the big ideas, and then we'll show you how the technicalities implement these ideas. So next is street design. There's a longing in Kingston for new and improved streets to support walkability and bikeability and community beauty and appearance and the quality of your addresses, and to include street trees. So we've baked that in here. On parking, there's really an essential mechanism to right size the parking. Not too little, not too much, just right. That will allow enough parking to support business activity and life, daily life, but not requiring too much, which ends up, paving too much area, discouraging building reuse, works against affordability or environmental goals. And then finally, there's a mission to fix trouble spots. We found and heard about a great many of these trouble spots in the existing code, including reducing the number of non-conforming lots and clarifying the standards to make the code easier to understand and use. So our team produced a whole series of drawings and illustrations during the charrette. You can see many of these at Engage Kingston. We'll reuse some of them tonight to explain how they've come into the code. We made these illustrations to show potential infill and change on opportunity sites in the town based on input from the community. We've been checking these illustrations with the draft code and going back and forth and with that checklist of big ideas that I've just read off. So here's, in this image, is an example of those sketches in Rondout along Broadway near Spring Street. And in before and after sequence, first I showed the existing conditions. Now here are the potential future conditions. And what you're seeing are the creation of new mixed-use buildings, a variety of housing types, filling in the vacant or underutilized land with the goal of reactivating this side of Broadway. Now, let me go on to the next one. The new standards in the draft code allow a mix of uses and building types based on their context. So that will allow for matching existing and historic neighborhood patterns. There's also a new streamlined approvals process for smaller projects, which could end up applying to these individual infill sites. So to point out a couple other things in a drawing like this one, new architectural standards. These includes things like the details of shopfront design and the composition of architectural facades, masonry detailing, items like this to create new pedestrian scale and inviting and active facades. And then just to point out a last little group of things here, there are requirements for affordable housing. There's a potential for bonus height in exchange for additional affordable units, allowances for those accessory dwelling units or ADUs that I described a moment ago, and a variety of building types that will increase access to housing. The code also includes some requirements for new public open spaces. For example, provisions for a waterfront overlay area and provisions for development on steep slopes both increase sustainability approaches. And then to point out on streets, we expect there to be new and improved streets. So the goal for these is to, following the rule book, design them according to their surrounding context and include street trees and connected sidewalks. Now, I mentioned parking a moment ago. Parking will be determined based on market demand. So there won't be a citywide top-down one-size-fits-all parking ratio. Instead, there will be, in some cases, maximum ratios. The maximum amount of parking one is allowed to provide without special permission. That's to just make sure that new development is not over providing parking, in a way that's detrimental to the surrounding environment. And then last on that list was the new, clearer, easy to use standards. What we want to do is make it easy to build building types and patterns that were established for centuries in Kingston's neighborhoods. Wow, so that's a lot in one little drawing, right? But all of that is really tested by the code. Now, let's just next go to Uptown. Let's take a look at Uptown. And Amy, break in if there's any audio problem or if you need to clarify anything I'm saying. The big ideas that I described before apply to sites that are small and to sites that are large. So here's a photo of existing conditions in Uptown, for example, on Clinton Avenue. And we made a before and after picture here as well. So now you're seeing the after picture. The after image shows a potential new infill development on an individual lot. The scale of the building, the setbacks, the parking location, the architectural detailing, all of those items would be guided by the new code. Okay, that's a lot. Now let's just talk a little bit about this first draft of the code. I'm going to explain a little bit for those who are at their first meeting on this subject about what we mean by form-based codes. And then we're going to talk about the table of contents of the new draft. For those who have not been to previous meetings, here's a very brief summary of form-based codes. It's a type of land development regulation. And this type of land development regulation focuses primarily on the physical form of development rather than separating the land uses as its way of organizing the code. And that's partly reflecting what we learned from historic places about how uses within a building change over time. But also the most important thing about how things go together on their street scene is how they are shaped, how they look, how they're built, not necessarily what activity is inside the building. So if you want to learn more about form-based codes, take a look at formbasedcodes.org. There's a lot more info in there and examples of other communities that have used this approach as their regulatory tool. Now, you might be wondering, if you're new to this topic, why we suggest using a form-based code, why Kingston advertised and asked for consultants like us to come help produce a form-based code. Here's why. It creates a more predictable result. And of course, uncertainty is the enemy of quality investment. Unpredictability is friendly to speculators, but not to livability and sustainability. So that predictability is crucial. And what the form-based code becomes is a way of proactively shaping the rules for the buildings in the future, so that each new development contributes in a positive way to the whole and to the public realm. So the rules in the form-based code define with greater specificity where certain things have to be, like where parking is located, where buildings are located on their lots. But that's all intentional. It's done in order to make it possible for lots of small developments to go together in a quality ensemble. Now, I want to define a term here, the transect. You're going to hear the term transect a few times, or transect zone. You'll hear us referring to them by their nicknames, T1, T2, T5, T6. So transect zones are an organizing feature that many form-based codes use as a way of setting up the code. And so transect zones, which we refer to as T1 or T2 or T3, are in a range. Each one has a defined set of characteristics to create a specific kind of place. So you have one kind of transect for the leafy suburbs where the buildings are set far apart. You have a different transect for Main Street, just as an example. So down at the rural and natural end of the range, T1 and T2, these are the natural and rural areas. And as the transect number gets higher, the development gets more intense, buildings come closer together, the mix of land uses increases. So T6, the hypothetical or ideal very top of this spectrum, would be for the scale of the high-rise core of a major metropolitan center, maybe Times Square. We don't have that in Kingston. That's not Kingston. So our transect zones top out at T5, the scale of traditional main streets. So in this slide, you can kind of see what we mean by that range. The form-based code draft in front of you has applied this transect idea to the entirety of the city of Kingston, identifying T5 areas where the greatest intensity is, for example, on Broadway, and T1, natural areas like the new Waterfront State Park, and then all of the other zones in between. And we'll get into other details about the transect as we review the draft provisions. So what I want to do next is give a quick recap of the table of contents of the new draft, explain what's in the code. The draft code is, like a legal document that it is, divided into a series of articles. Article 1 is where the overview occurs. It's the overview of the purpose of the code, describes the legislative intent, it defines key terms. There's a section in Article 1 called How to Use the Form-Based Code, and that gives the overview of how to navigate the document. Article 2 provides regulating maps. This is where we've applied the transect zones to the geography, to the land. And it also describes any site-specific special requirements to certain parcels, the city's parcels. Article 3 describes standards for each of the transect zones. 1 through 5. Article 4 has general standards that apply to multiple transect zones, in some cases all of them. For example, general standards include the standards for affordable housing, parking, signage, and the waterfront overlay I mentioned before. Now, scrolling down in that table of contents, Article 5 provides guidance for new or redesigned streets. So that's the street design chapter. Article 6 describes requirements for public open space. Now in Article 7, something new happens. Sites that are 2 acres or larger can use what are called the large site standards in Article 7 to create a whole new walkable neighborhood or a conservation village. Just a couple more. Article 8 describes the code administration. This is the procedural chapter, including a streamlined process for small and incremental projects, as I mentioned before. And then Article 9 describes some existing standards that supplement the form-based code, like where we've brought over, for example, the existing flood hazard overlay standards. And now I'll turn it back to Amy.
Thank you. So now we're going to walk through each of those articles in a little more detail and talk about what's in each of them. So starting with Article 2, the regulating map. So as Victor mentioned, this applies the transect zones to each of Kingston's parcels. So the purple areas you see are T5, the most intense areas of the city where buildings are closest together and heights are the greatest. The T4 neighborhoods are in blue, the T3 in orange. And then the lower transects, larger lot, conservation and natural areas are in various shades of greens. So there's a plot of this map in the room here tonight, and it's also available on the engagedkingston.com website if you want to zoom in and look at all the details of what's on for each individual parcel. So as you study the details, you're going to find there's several variations of T5, T4, and T3. So the zones have been calibrated to fit the unique conditions that we find in all of Kingston's neighborhoods. So each zone has its own characteristics, if the buildings are attached or detached, how close the buildings are to the sidewalk, how tall they are, where parking is located. So this summary table you can find in Article 3 of the code, and I'm going to walk through all the details of that fine print now. So T5, I mentioned there's 3 types. The T5 Main Street is the city's most walkable areas where buildings are attached. They often have shop fronts at the ground level, and they're located right along the back edge of the sidewalk. They have the greatest permitted heights, up to 4 stories and up to 6 stories with bonus height. So examples of this can be found along Broadway or along Wall Street in Uptown. T5 flex areas accommodate a diverse range of uses and building types, including light industrial areas. Buildings could be attached or detached, but they're still close to the sidewalk with parking to the side or the rear. So for example, you can see the Midtown area back behind Broadway is in this zone. So the T5 neighborhood areas are a variety of housing types, small to large footprint buildings in a walkable neighborhood. So the buildings may be attached or detached, and parking is usually to the rear. So examples of this area are Clinton Avenue and Green Street in Uptown. So T4 also has a few variations. So Delaware Avenue east of 9W is what we call a T4 Main Street area. So this is similar to T5 Main Street, but with shorter buildings. The T4 neighborhood has a variety of housing types. Again, in small to medium buildings, buildings are usually close to the sidewalk, behind a small dooryard, and parking to the side of the rear. So you can see on the map here, examples of this are found in Rondout and Ponconky. The T4 neighborhood also has what we call an open subzone. It's the slightly darker shade on the map. And so this has the same urban form characteristics, but permits a greater mix of uses. So for example, you might have small offices or neighborhoods serving shops within those building types. Moving on to the T3 neighborhoods, they consist of small to medium detached homes set back from the street behind a small yard. Stoops and porches are common in these areas. So except for the corner stores that we permit in the neighborhood, commercial areas are a little more restricted in the commercial uses, I should say, are a little more restricted in the T3 areas. But as in T4, we have what's called an open subzone. And so that allows a greater mix of use. So you can see on this map here, Albany Avenue, that darker shade of orange, that's the T3 open, where you could find small businesses within detached housing building types. We have something called T3 large lot and then T2 conservation. So in these areas, you'll see the block and street network becomes larger and less defined, and often due to natural features like steep slopes. So, you know, the kind of the irregular block pattern. Buildings are typically detached and set back from the street, often behind medium and large setbacks. So examples of this area can be found along Wilbur Avenue. And again, the T1 areas are areas of preservation of open spaces and natural resources. The example on this screen here is the waterfront park area. So there's a few areas that don't fit exactly into one of these transects, and we call them special districts. So there's something called special district commercial and special district flex. So these allow drivable commercial and then drivable industrial and flex use areas. So in these areas, buildings are detached behind medium and large setbacks. So an example of this is the Kingston Plaza area. There's also a special district multifamily to allow for drivable and garden apartment style residential development, and then a special district institutional, which allows flexibility for larger institutional uses like the Kingston High School or City Hall like we're in today. So when you're reviewing the code, you'll find each zone has a series of pages that look like this, that summarize what's permitted there, where buildings are to be placed on the lots, how tall they can be, where parking can be located, and what types of building allowed. So for example, this is an example of the T5 zone. I'm going to pull up next an example of the T3 zone. As I switch between, you can see in the diagrams, the buildings become shorter, the buildings are more attached. In this T3 example, there's less variety of building types because in the T3 areas, you have more of the residential types. So that, again, you know, as you page through the code, you'll start to see these differences come out between the different transect zones. So uses are still permitted in a form-based code, but they're secondary to the urban form. So there's a permitted use chart in Article 3, and it identifies what's allowed within each transect zone. So the uses are a little more simplified. So for example, there's general commercial, and that covers a broad range of commercial uses and would be allowed within those areas. Special permits are needed for a few identified potentially incompatible uses. So for example, controlled substance sales or auto-oriented services. So these are called out specifically in the darker gray shading on the chart. And there's supplemental use standards in Article 4 that provide a little more guidance for how these can fit within the neighborhoods. Special permits may also be needed for larger footprint users. So for example, these larger footprint uses might be incompatible with surrounding context. So you'd want to get a little bit of an extra level of review. So any commercial use with a footprint greater than 10,000 square feet requires a special permit in T5. And any commercial use with a footprint larger than 6,000 square feet requires that special permit in T3 and T4. The use chart's organized by residential, lodging, and commerce. And I'm going to scroll to the next, and you'll see there's also civic support and industrial uses listed. I want to call attention to a couple of uses that we received a lot of input and questions about. So I want to talk about what the proposed draft says about these. Short-term rentals is one example. So these are specifically identified in the use chart. Short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied are prohibited in most neighborhoods. They're only allowed by right in the Main Street or T5 flex areas. Owner-occupied short-term rentals, where the owner lives on the same lot, are allowed more broadly across the city. And then consistent with city policy, the short-term rentals would be required to pay a fee and register with the building safety department. And finally, urban agriculture, we heard a lot about during the charrette. So the proposed drafts would allow urban agriculture on parcels up to 2 acres in size throughout the city. In Main Street areas, this could be limited to community gardens. And there are some special standards that limit the impacts to neighbors listed in the supplemental use standards, such as fencing and storage and drainage to make sure that this is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. So now I'm going to turn it over to Eric to talk through the next couple of articles.
Thank you, Amy. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric. I'm a town planner, urban designer with Dover Cole. And I wanted to first start off by saying, like, one of the reasons we were so excited to be able to work here in Kingston is because we were able to study some of the most historic urban fabric anywhere in the country. Even with the setbacks of urban renewal and Rondout, the proportion of historic neighborhoods still intact here is something to be very proud of. So that's where we started. We studied the historic building types found all throughout Kingston and permitted them within their respective Transect district. This makes it easy for Kingston to hold on to its built heritage and to keep it in moving into the future. Everything from your typical Main Street building to your small neighborhood mansion apartments or small multiplexes, to the many corner stores found on neighborhood street corners in Kingston's neighborhoods, to your stately duplexes, and the historic workhorse of Kingston housing, the traditional American four-square, Victorian craftsman cottages and detached houses. All of these are each a critical component of a healthy housing ecosystem that together has supported a diverse community over the centuries. So the details of how each of these building types interact with the street are important when ensuring good neighborhood design and making sure that these new buildings fit in with the existing neighborhood character and historic precedents in these neighborhoods. Front yards, for example, are a common sight in some suburban neighborhoods, while shop fronts are a key identifying factor for other parts of town, such as Broadway, Uptown, and Rondout. Specialized frontage conditions are identified in this draft to support some unique streetscapes, such as this gallery frontage type for Main Street buildings. We also heard a lot about how good design is important to the community. So we have included architectural standards that make it easy for new development to get what's important. And dividing facades into distinct horizontal components is one part of that helps communicate height to pedestrians. While vertical components focused around structural and fenestration center lines help communicate building length to pedestrians. Solid blank walls can really detract from a pleasant pedestrian experience. So this draft is proposing a minimum fenestration requirement, meaning that walls will have to have a certain amount of windows and doors. Shop fronts are one of the most important parts of a walkable downtown setting. So we've highlighted some best practices from around the country when it comes to shop front design and the architectural standards. Another example, the proportion of different facade elements can often be overlooked, often be an overlooked component of design review efforts. But we've laid out what we think is an easy to follow guide to help with that in this code. So the tools are here to really help ensure that new development fits in with the historic character of Kingston. Kingston also has many special and unique parts of town that sometimes need a little extra attention. And so we've highlighted where special requirements for certain areas are identified on the special requirements map. For example, the waterfront area is a special area and it has its own dedicated overlay because of that. This overlay requires continuous public access to be incorporated into new development, particularly at waterfront street intersections. And attractive screening is required for working waterfront uses. Environmental protections are included, such as the protection of significant natural features, the prohibition of septic systems, and the storage of certain environmental contaminants is given special attention, such as the storage of road salt. We also have included a best practice here by identifying the 500-year floodplain as a local design flood elevation, as recommended by the state of New York. This will require new development to be more resilient to sea level rise and future storm surge events. So Another component of this is when looking at parking, we talked a little bit about this before, but it's important to understand the surrounding context of an area. Ulster Avenue, for example, is different than the Stockade District, and we wouldn't want to require the same thing in both areas. A citywide one-size-fits-all parking requirement is a blunt tool that too often can work against community goals for a specific area. We are proposing parking standards that work with community goals. In some areas, that means keeping parking minimums, but adjusting them some, while in other parts of town, minimum parking requirements can actively harm a historic Main Street. So we'll propose a maximum parking requirement in place of a minimum requirement in some of the more historic parts of town. Taking a look at signage standards is important for historic districts, and so we've outlined a simple guide to encourage pedestrian-oriented signage. Regarding accessory dwelling units, ADUs, the AARP has been an outspoken proponent of ADUs for a number of reasons, including that they provide a key social service for an aging population that may prefer not to live in a nursing home, as well as the fiscal health they allow by allowing aging homeowners to supplement their income with an additional revenue stream, and their ability to provide a more affordable housing option for the community. So we're looking at what the AARP has identified as best practices and incorporating some of those recommendations into this draft. So another key part of this, improving affordability is consistently identified as the most important issue by many community members when visioning a better Kingston. This code update calls for the 10% rule. The 10% of all new housing developments with 7 or more units would be made affordable, be required to be made affordable. But one of the most important factors in this is the definition of affordable. Here we're defining affordability as what meets or what is 30% of a household's income, with a maximum eligible income of 80% of the county median. Not the definition of affordability is not 30% of the county median. It's 30% of a homeowner's income. So in addition, as another way to increase affordable housing options, a bonus height is outlined here that would allow in some districts, that would be allowed in some districts if 20% of the total units are identified as affordable. So moving on to street standards here, Kingston streets are very special, as we all know, being laid out before the car. The narrow right-of-ways of Kingston present numerous engineering challenges, but also important opportunities. We want to avoid the mistakes that other communities have made when designing streets only for fast-moving traffic everywhere. Conventional street design has 3 main goals, right? Moving cars through quickly, fast, and in a hurry. So while this may be best for some streets, this shouldn't be the mindset everywhere. Again, we need to look at context. As you can see here, a single street can move through multiple different contexts and adapt to its surroundings and not make the surroundings adapt to it. So this is what that guidance could look like, or would look like as proposed when mapped out here. Streets that respond to where they are and are designed accordingly. These standards could be applied to new street construction or serve as guidance for the city's efforts when retrofitting existing streets. I know this text is small here for people in the room. We have more of that. We have those on the boards here too. So feel free to look around there. So here are a few examples of how street design can respond to context. Here's a typical street section for an arterial that goes through a compact historic neighborhood. Street trees and wide sidewalks can be accommodated, and in the case of a more narrow right-of-way, street trees can alternate with on-street parking to provide shade and improve the pedestrian experience. And with an even more narrow right-of-way, yield streets can provide each of the elements of good street design when sharing the space within a right-of-way more proportionally with its width. And in a few cases, on some short stretches of a street, it's even possible to really provide a comfortable street for people, streets that prioritize bicycles and pedestrians, one that makes the right-of-way a safe public space for kids to play, and cars that may move along at a walking pace. The same people that originally laid out Kingston streets, the Dutch, are making Vonner's popular around the world. So outside of town, streets can take on their primary or a primary role of moving cars at safe speeds again. And I'd like to turn it back over to Amy for an overview of public open spaces.
Great, thank you. And we have just a couple more articles, and then we're going to, again, be asking some questions to you all to get some reactions to some of the things that are in the draft code. But as Victor mentioned up front, there's requirements for public open space in the code. The draft code has a requirement that at least 10% of any development site be public open space. Residential developments of 3 or less units or lots less than 5,000 square feet could be exempt from this. So, very small projects. The requirement would be met either on site or by payment of cash in lieu. And so this provision is intended to replace what's in Chapter 347 right now, the reservation of parkland. And the idea is to give a more consistent standard that can be implemented for all development and get new open spaces, or that cash in lieu that would be directly applicable to fund efforts of improvements of spaces. So the code has standards for what constitutes open space. It has to be accessible, generally with streets on at least 2 sides and not fenced in. It should be at least 20% shaded. And there are restrictions on development of steep slope areas. So steep slopes and waterways and floodplains can only account for up to half of that 10% minimum area. So the open space needs to be accessible and usable. And a variety of public open space types are defined in the code. So you can see them here, the images, parks and greens, squares, plazas, playgrounds, community gardens, and trails. And in the chart here, there's requirements for what the sizing should be and how those can be accessible and used. So there's a section of the code called the large site standards. So these provide for sites larger than 2 acres that they could be subdivided to create new walkable areas. Design standards require that the sites utilize the Transect and lot standards in Article 3 to create new streets and public open spaces. There's something called a conservation village plan, which is intended for use in the T2 and T3 areas, which requires that 50% of the site be preserved as natural area. And then there's something called the walkable neighborhood plan, which can be applied to areas in T3, T4, and T5 that can be subdivided into a mix of transect zones and building types. So we want to look at a drawing here to see what exactly that could look like. So here's an example of a large site at the edge of a neighborhood. I'll note this is not in Kingston. We just wanted to do an illustration of kind of a prototypical site to show how these 2 scenarios could play out. So here's an example of how that could be subdivided to a conservation village plan. So you can see 50% of the site is preserved as open space. The remainder of the site is allocated to lots that meet the standards of the T3 and T4 transect zones. And there's, the buildings are along new streets that provide walkable connections to the adjacent neighborhood. So conversely, if we were going to look at a walkable neighborhood plan, that would look a little different. So again, 10% of the site would be preserved for open space according to the open space standards. But then you would have a network of new streets that provide frontages for lots and a mix of buildings that meet the T3, the T4, and the T5 standards. And again, there's percentages that they're allocated. So the goal is to result into a mix of building types and really an extension of what you all have here in Kingston with traditional neighborhoods and being able to if there are areas of growth in the future, that you continue that pattern. So the last article we're going to talk about, administration, wanted to talk through some of the big ideas. The main proposal in this code is this establishment of a new review board and approval process that is to streamline smaller and incremental infill, and we call it the minor site plan. So a minor site plan is an area that's applicable to development that's determined to be a seeker type 2 and development on land less than 2 acres and consisting of 1 to 2 lots. So the approval of a minor site plan is granted administratively by the Minor Site Plan Review Board. So this is a new review board. It would be comprised of 2 to 5 officials from the city, which could include the planning director, the city engineer, the building safety officer, and others. So Article 8 also identifies what we call minor waivers or major waivers. And so these are identified permitted design variations. Because we're introducing so many very specific design rules, we know that when you have a unique site, you might have a need for some deviations. So a minor waiver is, as defined in the code, could be granted by the Minor Site Plan Review Board, and major waivers would go to Planning Board. And so to kind of give an overview of the process, here's a diagram that's in the code. That new approval path is what you see in the dark blue for a minor site plan. So the major site plans would, as you see in the medium blue, would follow a process similar to what they do today. There would be a potential for a public hearing and then approval through the Planning Board. If major waivers or variances, or if the building is located in a historic district, additional supplemental reviews and approvals are needed. And so those you can see would require those additional review before it went back to the process to go to the Planning Board or the Minor Site Plan Review Board. So I know that was a lot. The goal was to give kind of a digestible overview of what all is in the code. I want to take a few minutes now to do, again, another quick poll. So curious for everyone in the room just to kind of get, and online, I know we've got a sizable number online as well, to get a sense of your thoughts and reactions to some of these things. So again, if you participated in this earlier, the instructions are the same, so you can open that same window. But for anyone who didn't participate earlier, if you want to join in and send us some reactions by text messaging, again, you can send a text to the number 22333 and send the message Dover Cole 516. You do it successfully, you should get a confirmation. If you are not getting that confirmation, if you're in the room tonight, you can raise your hand and Eric can come over and help you out, or online, send a chat and we'll see if we can figure that out. But hopefully the goal is to, once you do that, you should be able to then text your answers. So I'm going to first go over we're going to recap a couple of the big ideas from earlier tonight, and then we're going to ask for your reaction to it. So first question is going to be about the affordable housing standards. Again, the proposal is for to have 10% of units be required to be affordable for buildings with 7 or more units. The definition of affordable being rent no more than 30% of the household's income, and also the provision that there's an incentive for bonus height in many of the Transect zones for 1 to 2 floors if 20% or more of the total units are affordable. And I'm going to stop sharing so that Elise can start sharing on her end and bring up the first poll question about affordable housing.
Okay, so like Amy said, this is going to be about the affordable housing. And the question is, what do you think about the draft code provisions for affordable housing? And the answer choices are A, great idea, B, not sure yet, need more information, or C, revise this in the next draft. And we'll give everyone a couple minutes to get their answer choices in.
At least this might be a great moment to explain if someone sends an answer and then they think about it some more and they change their mind, what happens? Do you want to explain how they can change their answer?
Yeah, so if you clicked A and then you suddenly want B, you can send in B and it'll send you instructions to take out your answer, and it's possible to change your answer through that. So no worries if you accidentally click the wrong button. Awesome, and it looks like just about everyone has gotten in their answer choices. I'll give it a few more seconds to make sure, just in case anyone made any changes. And again, if you have any tech problems or anything like that, or you need help submitting your answers, send us a message in the chat and we'll do our best to help. Also, the text and the number that you send the text to is at the top of the screen as well. Okay, awesome. So it looks like just about everyone has answered. So we're going to go ahead to the next one.
Elise, before you go to the next one, there was one question that popped up in the chat about the results of this informal polling. Amy and Elise, will these results be posted on the website or available to people after tonight's meeting to see the results?
Yes, the recording of tonight will be posted on the Engage Kingston site, so you can watch the polling happen live on the video, or we also will be posting the, we can post the actual results as well. Could you go ahead and mute that for, sorry, we're going to have to toggle back and forth. Okay, so Elise, if you want to move on to the next question, I'll do the introduction and then I'll let you do the poll again. So we have a series of these questions. The next one is about accessory dwelling units. As Eric was mentioned, the proposal is that one accessory dwelling unit by right within certain building types. You can see here the detached house, the duplex, the row house, and the carriage house. And so there are some limits on size, but basically they're permitted citywide. So the goal is that either an attached or detached accessory dwelling unit could be permitted within these various building types throughout the city. So then I'm going to ask Elise to go ahead and pull up the code. I'm sorry, not the code, you've got it. The polling. So you can go ahead and the answers are the same. So what do you think about the draft code provisions for accessory dwelling units? So again, it's A is a great idea. B is not sure yet, need more information. And C is revise this in the next draft. And I just want to mention for everyone who has revised this in the next draft, we do have, there are some feedback forms here in the room. If you have some specific ideas about things that you think we should be changing on these provisions, to let us know. And for everyone joining online on the Engage Kingston website, there's a feedback form where you can similarly tell us, specifically, I liked the idea, but I think this should change, or I think these 5 things should be different. We're really looking for, some of that specific feedback so that we can make the next draft of the code closer to what everyone here would like to see. And if you could unmute so Elise can let us know. Sorry, I got to. All right, Elise, we should be able to hear you in the room now.
Okay, perfect. And we'll just give it a little bit more time so everyone can get their answers in. Okay, it looks like everyone has gotten their choices in. And so we'll go to the next one. Amy, do you want to explain the slide?
Sorry, Bartek. It's a little bit of a toggle so that I don't have echo, but I think we figured it out. Okay. So the next is short-term rentals. So again, the proposal is that short-term rentals that are not owner-occupied would be prohibited in most neighborhoods, so only allowed in the Main Street areas or the T5 Flex. But short-term rentals that are owner-occupied, again, permitted in many more areas. And then similar to the policy that was just recently passed by the city, the short-term rentals would have to pay a fee and register with Building Safety Department. So Annalise, if you want to go ahead and bring up the polling, again, the similar question. What do you think about the code provisions for short-term rentals? A, great idea. B, not sure yet, need more information. And C, revise this in the next draft. And Elise, if you want to just give me a thumbs up when you think that we're close to the total number, then we can move on. But we'll give a few more minutes for everyone to get those answers in.
At least on your dashboard, you get a readout for a number of respondents as they're coming in, right?
I don't, but I usually just
Okay.
pause it when the numbers are kind of
When
steady
it
for a little while.
stabilizes, okay.
Mhm.
And we'll be able to go back through the results later after the fact and get an idea how many participants there were in the poll.
Yes.
Okay.
Amy, did you want to go ahead and explain this slide?
Amy, if you're answering, we're not hearing you online. So you might be muted on your end on Zoom. So Elise, let's just pause here for a second, sort out a quick audio issue that, Amy, we were able to hear you before, but we are not hearing you now. So something has changed in terms of the mute unmute on your end.
Great. Did you all hear when I was introducing the slide already? Okay, we have something up. That's
Yeah, on the Zoom, you were silent here from the beginning of this slide. So if you, once you're unmuted, if you could just redo your introduction for the benefit of the 40-something people online.
Yes, great. Okay. So the parking standards, the draft provision is for no minimum requirements to be enforced by the city. So in many areas, it would be no one size fits all provision, but rather individual property owners based on market demand would determine the amount of parking to be provided. But there is a maximum that is being set.
Amy,
So,
Amy, whatever you just changed, it just got a lot better with the last few syllables. And prior to that, the interpreters couldn't hear you well, and it was difficult for those of us online. So you've got it now. Whatever you're doing right now, keep it that way. Solder
Eric,
it
don't touch anything.
And start one more time on this slide, please. Thanks.
Okay,
Thanks.
one last time. Parking standards. It's an important one, so let's go through it one more time. So parking. Again, there's the draft proposal is to have no minimum requirements in many of the zones. So the amount of parking to be provided would be determined by individual property owners based on their needs and what they think is market demand. We did set maximums in this draft, so to limit the total the total number of parking, so they didn't get excessively large parking areas. So you can see the standards here, what's in the code. And Elise, if you want to go ahead onto the next slide, we'll ask that same question. What do you think of the draft code provisions for parking? So A is great idea, B, not sure yet, need more information, and C, revise this in the next draft.
Where is this parking? Is it in your driveway?
So the question in the room is, where is this parking? It's meant for, like, for example, for commercial uses, where, in parking lots. So, in many codes, there's a minimum requirement where you have to have, for example, 10 spaces for your business. But because there's so many areas in Kingston that are naturally walkable and there's on-street parking, and in order to encourage the reuse of the historic buildings, we didn't want to set a minimum standard, but rather the thought is to let the individual property owners to kind of determine how much they need and how much can be provided on the lots, the sizes that they have. So the idea is not to have a minimum amount dictated in the code.
So this is what we're wondering. If you own a house and you have a driveway, does this pertain to that, or this is just parking on the street in the residential areas?
So the Bartek, do you?
It could. If you're developing a single family home, a new one, then under the new code, you would not have to have a minimum.
Yeah, but you're saying there's only 3 in a maximum and some.
So it's only for new development.
There's like 2 parents and 2 kids, that's 4 cars.
Oh, I see. You're worried about we're at the maximum number of cars for a house. That's interesting. Okay, that's a good point. I think we were thinking about the maximum in terms of parking lots and trying to reduce the size of that, but maybe the maximums need to be tied to parking lots. We'll think that over.
Yeah, it needs to be specified where the parking is referring to, because your driveway is different than the park on the street.
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, I think we've, at least does it seem like we're still having answers coming in or, okay. So we're gonna go on to the next question. Public open space. So again, the draft code provision is for at least 10% of the area of a site, 5,000 square feet or more to be required to be public open space. There is an exemption for smaller developments, so residential development of 3 or less units. And for sites, again, less than 5,000 square feet would not be required. You can meet this on site or you can pay cash in lieu, and that cash in lieu would go towards open space improvements in the city. So this is proposed to replace Chapter 347, again, to give a more detailed specific percentage requirement. So Elise, if you want to advance to the next slide. So what do you think about the draft code provisions for public open space? A, great idea, B, not sure yet, and C, revise this in the next draft.
So I have a question. So the payment going, that doesn't mean you would have to create the same amount of public space in the city elsewhere. It just means improvements in public space in the city. So it sounds like a way to opt out of having to have the open space.
So,
you know,
Yeah, I can answer this. Yeah, under the current draft, which again, this is a
I mean,
draft,
that's so bad.
you could opt out by paying into the city's parkland.
But that doesn't mean creating more open space, right?
The city, so Parks and Rec uses that fund sometimes to create new open space, but otherwise sometimes for capital
Right,
improvements.
so that means we're not going to get more open space necessarily.
Right, not necessarily.
There's something else going on.
okay, Lisa, are we still getting answers in? Okay, we'll give it a few more minutes. And I thank everyone for I think we thought a best way to involve both the online folks and the in-person folks in some similar questions. So I think this was an interesting, kind of way to gather some feedback. But again, want to mention that we do have, those feedback forms both online for the folks joining us, and folks in the room again can, if you want to stay around and talk with us a bit more after this. Of course, the goal of tonight and certainly even more so the open house events coming up is to get feedback on these ideas so that we can, again, shape the next draft of the code. Elise, are you ready to go on to the next slide? Great. Okay, so we have, oh, there we go. Okay, so so based on what you heard tonight, so we know this was just an overview, but we're just kind of curious to hear if we're on the right track or not. So we're asking, is the draft form-based code on the right track? So A is yes. B is probably yes with some updates. C is not sure yet, I need more information. And D is no. I'll read those answers one more time, just in case folks are further back in the room. So A is yes, B probably yes with some updates. C, not sure yet, need more information. And D is no. And again, this is just based on what you've heard tonight and what you know so far. I'm curious if we're on the right track so far. All right, and our last few questions we have are actually some open-ended questions. So get your texting fingers ready. We're curious for anyone who wrote, who answered that they're not sure yet, or who answered no, or had some feedback on some of those earlier questions that you didn't think it was quite right. What concepts do you think need more work in the next draft? So you can go ahead and text your short answer, and they should pop up here on the screen. I mean, it takes a few minutes for everyone to write them out, but again, just some quick thoughts. Again, there'll be time for some more detailed feedback, but just curious if there's any specific topics that jumped out to you tonight that you think we should really focus on that need some more work.
If anyone in the room doesn't want to text, but just wants to say something, raise your hand.
I've been involved with the open space plan in the city of Kingston, and I feel that there needs to be a very clear definition of what the open space plan is calling open space and what you're calling open space.
Okay, so for folks online, I'm going to paraphrase and let me know if there's just some feedback in the room about the open space plan and how we are classifying open space in the code, and how the open space plan is classifying open space, and making sure that the two are consistent with each other. Is that about right? Okay.
I have several comments, since you're taking them. One is, you note that there will be a suggestion requirement, I'm not clear, for protecting existing mature trees. Is that just a suggestion? Same with the bluestone. I mean, are these binding, or is that will be decided by the city? That's one question I have. Another is, you talk about the sidewalk width, they vary. In my neighborhood, some of them are much narrower, and that fits with houses close to the street. So I'm a little wary of like one size fits all street width. I think it depends on the context. Another is, I'm in the Midtown, I think it's T4 residential, and I noticed that large multiplexes are allowed in that neighborhood. Also, there's no description of the fact that most of the houses have front porches. And so I'm wondering, right now the neighborhood is mainly 4 units or less, not 8 units. That would be a lot. I don't know if there's height restrictions, so that would help mitigate having large buildings, but I'm kind of thinking, well, they're allowed there, but they're not allowed in like the more suburban areas where there's more space. We're already pretty dense, so I'm a little concerned about, I have no problem with the small multiplexes, but the large. And the other thing about the ADUs is it's 1,000 square feet or less, and I'm wondering, does the lot size have any bearing on that? So if you have a small lot size, can you build all the way to the lot, or are there other requirements that would, setbacks, et cetera, that would, limit how much you could build? Those are my issues.
So I'll answer that one real quick, because like that's an easier one. This one, the first ones might require some conversation. The question was about the accessory dwelling units, the 1,000 square feet, and would there be any limit on that based on the lot size, and concerns about a small lot, filling out a bigger portion of the lot. So they would still have to follow the setback rules in the Transect zone. So for example, if there are setbacks, if you're in a T3 area and you have those setbacks, you would have to, set back the carriage house or the accessory. If it's a detached unit, it would have to fit within those rules.
Okay.
Lisa, are we still getting texts in, or do you want to move on to we have 2 more questions, and then we've got, we're going to call on Max to give us a little preview of something else exciting that we've got, the Gridix platform that we've just got online today. So Elise, do you want to move on to the next question? Okay, so the next question is, oops, okay, so that one more goes to the last question. I'll make a note. Okay, so what concepts discussed tonight were the most exciting to you? So we're curious if there are things you heard tonight that you think are, right on track, and you're really excited to see them being part of the code for the city of Kingston. And I want to thank everyone for being with us tonight. Again, it's kind of a dense topic and a lot of detail, but we've got a lot of opportunities still coming this weekend with the different open house events. So I think we're really looking forward to having lots of good conversations. And if you want to encourage your neighbors and your friends to come out and meet with us, we're looking forward to those events.
Amy, while you're pausing here to see some of these typed in answers appear on the screen, this is a really important question, because remember, those of us who are watching and those of you who are participating in the poll are a relatively small self-selected sample of the people of Kingston. And so you are, on the other hand, a very scientifically, statistically valid sample of the people who will come to a public meeting and speak up and participate. So as we think about moving from this informational meeting and getting started with your review of the first draft and moving in the future toward official public hearings and the adoption by your elected officials of these pieces of legislation, it's really important for you to communicate here what you want to be sure is still there in the next draft. If there's an idea that you feel really strongly that you're glad it's there, I urge you to type something in right now, because this is a message to your elected officials and to the people who are going to go work on the second draft of things not to lose. Ideas for which there's somebody out there in the audience, maybe several of you, who are particularly positive about that feature. And so since this is a big collection of reforms, large and small, this particular one, we should linger on it for long enough for you to get it on the screen if it's something you want to be sure doesn't fade away in the next draft.
I really love this whole presentation and watching Kingston change in such a positive direction. Two things I'm worried about is residential areas and parking is a big thing, especially in the Midtown area. Other than that, all of this to me is right on point. You're, touching on the housing phases of the housing. I mean, I love the Clinton Avenue. We go to Hanford's. I love the way that you're bringing that corner together there. I'm so thrilled and excited about seeing this, but I am concerned about the residential neighborhoods in the Midtown area and the parking. We definitely need to adjust street parking.
Amy, the interpreter sent us a chat message that said it's a little difficult for them to hear. I think that was Eileen, what the comments from the audience. And so if you don't mind paraphrasing or summarizing what we heard there, so the interpreters can have a chance to get that out in the Spanish translation.
Okay. Oops.
And you'll have to put your audio back like it was before.
Okay, I'll do my best. You have to help me out. So you were saying that you were excited by many of the things that you saw tonight, but the things that you were concerned about, again, you were worried about parking, and specifically about parking. Can you say that again?
The on-street parking, as right now is into the city, differently, it's getting very tight.
So concerns about on-street parking, and then I'm sorry, the second thing again?
The residential neighborhoods.
The residential neighborhoods.
Commercial doesn't.
So not having commercial intruding on the residential neighborhoods. Those were the two. Is that?
Everything else?
Everything else is thumbs up.
I love the presentation, love the way that it's coming across, and love that you're asking for our opinions.
Great.
That's the best.
She said that she loves that we're asking for opinions. So I'll take that. Okay, Elise, do we want to move on to the last question for tonight? Okay, so this is just about topics you would like more information about. So if there's something that we quickly mentioned and you just wanted to hear more about it, you're not sure, what exactly is in the code, you want to learn more about it, this will help us to know to kind of shape future presentations and to be able to provide FAQs on the website. So what topics are there about the code that you want to know more about? So there's one question on here. I'm going to help to just send you to where you can reference for more information. There was a question about the major and the minor waivers. And so that is a new concept in the code. And so if you look in Article 8, there's actually a chart in Article 8. And if you come to any of the open house events, we've actually got a board with that chart printed on it. It basically identifies some of the specific design requirements in the code that we think might need to be might need to be adjusted based on a site-specific constraint. It lists out what those provisions are and what is allowed to be changed and who can grant it. And basically, if it's a minor waiver, the minor site plan review board would review it. And if it's a major waiver, the planning board would review it. But if you want to reference Article 8, it's pretty easy to find as a big chart that describes what all of those potential minor and major waivers are. And Max, I see you online. I want to give you a heads up that you are coming up next. It's exciting. Max Zavala from Gridix has been furiously working since we released the draft of the code to translate it all into his online platform, so that you all would be able to also, in addition to just being able to read the code in the PDF, to go into an interactive website to review the code. So we've actually just published the draft today. So the link is on the Engage Kingston site where you can go to look at that. But I'm going to ask, as soon as this question is done, we're going to bring the audio up for Max to be able to just kind of give us a preview of what that looks like. And Elise, do you think do we have any more answers coming in? Thumbs up. Okay, great. So Max, I'm going to bring up the screen on my end. I need to get to the slides. 1 second. Okay, here we go. And Max, if you want to take it away on your end.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Amy. Everybody can hear me okay? Well, first of all, good evening, everyone. And thank you again for joining us. As Amy said, this is a really first draft that we wanted to share with you. And I know it's late and there's a lot of really great information. So just I want to make this as quick and hopefully as interesting as possible. So very quickly again, my name is Max Zavala. I am the founder of Gridix. If we can go to the next slide. We're essentially a technology company. We're based in South Miami, South Florida. And we specialize on converting static analog information into digital searchable information. In particular, we specialize in zoning. And the main ability is having the capacity to transform the static documents, both being text and maps, put it through our patent and computational engine, and they become searchable maps, data, and text that you can actually navigate online. Let's go to the next one. So this is exactly what we've done as part of this project. And as Amy mentioned, we just put this out online. You're going to be able to access the system. And we've actually done 2 separate platforms. And if we go to the next one. So the first platform is, of course, set up our base. So this is going to be a map, as you can see here, that will have the current zoning of your city, of the city of Kingston. So you will be able to actually navigate, turn on the layers, click on parcels, and move around in this 3 interactive system. Let's go to the next one. And we have a sister instance of this, which is actually the proposed form-based code that we've been discussing today. The advantage of this is that you can actually, because all of the systems are online, you're going to be able to have one tab on the current zoning and another one of the proposed form-based code, and actually click and interact with one another. Again, this is really an interactive system. Let's go into the next one. So here's, for example, some screenshots of how we were hoping that everybody will be able to compare. So on the left is your current zoning. So it was a random parcel that was selected. And on the right is the same parcel, but with the proposed form-based codes. And you can actually start comparing some of the layers and some of the requirements. Let's go on to the next one. As part of this platform, and this is what really makes it, what we hope, really interesting to everybody. As you're clicking on parcels, you're going to see multiple things on pop-ups that are going to show up like this. The one is going to describe what the zoning district is, and then also links, the links that you see there in the bottom, the summary tables, and the T4 neighborhood link. Let's go to the next one. These links will actually take you to a digital version of the document. Definitely the PDF version that is going to be on the Engage Kingston website is the most, is the latest, is the base, but there's a complete digitized text in our platform. As you can see here, you will have the table of contents on the left and actual text on the right-hand side, where you can scroll, you can actually search. Let's go to the next one. Is fully interactive in the sense that any definition in particular that is important, you're going to be able to see it. So, and we also incorporated the concept of bookmarks. So as you're going through this, and especially now that we're asking for certain feedback, you can actually create bookmarks. You can create a free account, and you will be able to essentially save some of these bookmarks for future reference, and you can even share those references and send them via email or anything like that. Any section can be created into a bookmark. Move on to the next one. And by the way, as I'm showing this, the same functionality also exists for the current zoning. So you can do the same on both the current zones. As you can see here, it's fully searchable. So you can actually search for terms, search for complete phrases, and it will find it throughout the code. Let's move into the next one. Now, of course, and we were just taking all these very interesting polls on the phone. So all of this platform is actually built for phones as well. So you will be able to, definitely works best on a desktop or on a computer, on a laptop. It's just because, especially of the size of the maps and everything. But it's fully functional on your phone. So you're going to be able to see the text, navigate the map, and even click on certain parcels. So it's fully mobile ready. As Amy said, you will be able to find the links to all these two platforms on the Engage Kingston website, and hope everybody finds this useful.
Great, thank you. So I just want to end tonight just with a reminder again. We've got these series of open house events over the next few days, Friday and Saturday. So we'll have a lot more exhibits at these, and we can have some more detailed conversation. Max will be traveling up here. He'll be at our open house events over the weekend. So if you want to quiz him and have him run through his platform live with you, please come and do that. So the times you can do that, again, I'll just run through them. June 10th, which is Friday, we'll be here in this room from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. In the evening, we'll be over at the library from 5:30 to 7. The next day on Saturday, we've got an open house at the Old Dutch Church from 10:30 to 12, and then the Rondout Neighborhood Center from 1 to 2:30. And you can see on the slide here, there's some different words that are the focus of those meetings. But if you can't come to at the time of your specific neighborhood, we'll have all the same exhibits at the different open houses. So you can feel free to come to a different open house and come talk to us if you're not able to make the one for your specific where you live. So hope to see you all there. Again, hope to see you to come out and talk with us. We're asking for feedback by July 1st. So we've got the rest of this month to take some time to review, and there's a feedback form at the engagekingston.com website. You can see that web link here. And so again, anything that you saw tonight that you think needs updating or changing for the next draft, we're really curious to know your thoughts. And so again, I look forward to talking with you all in the next few days, and we're going to wrap up the Zoom meeting now. So I want to thank everyone who is joining us online. And
Amy, I also want to mention
say
that
good
I'm
night for now,
traveling
and
up
we'll
tomorrow.
see you soon. Thank
Amy,
you.
I want to mention
Oh.
that I'm traveling up tomorrow, and I will be in person for the events on the 10th and 11th with you and Eric.
That's right. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much.
Martin?
Yes.